The US Navy's long-troubled Zumwalt-class of stealth destroyers may look like they were ripped straight out of the pages of a science fiction novel, but after 30 years of development and more than $30 billion spent, these ships of the future have actually been little more than a financial albatross around the necks of Navy planners for some time now. Designed to serve as a shore-pounding modern-day equivalent to the massive battleships of bygone eras, the Zumwalt-class were built around an advanced new weapon system so groundbreaking that the US Navy can't actually afford to fire them. And as a result, what may be the stealthiest class of warships ever to set sail are now severely lacking in reasons to exist. Or at least, that was the case. Because as we speak, the Navy is making moves to refit its 3 Zumwalt-class destroyers to carry a new weapon, and to fulfill a new mission, as the Navy's first surface combatants to be armed with long-range hypersonic missiles. These new hypersonic glide vehicles are said to have a range outside of 1,700 miles, traveling at speeds well in excess of a mile per second. And the only thing more dangerous than a 610-foot-long warship packed with a dozen of these weapons is if that warship has the radar cross-section of your buddy's bass boat. So let's talk about what went wrong with the Navy's Zumwalt-class destroyers, and how they just may find renewed purpose as stealth hypersonic snipers in the vast expanses of the Pacific. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Sea Power. The United States just committed to send Ukraine another $725 million worth of military equipment, including counter-drone systems and anti-personnel landmines. And I've been staying on top of this story using Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects news stories published by outlets all around the world and places them all into a single easy-to-read feed, making it easier than ever to not just stay on top of things, but also to poke a hole through the bias that's so common in today's media coverage. Right here on Ground News, I can see that 306 outlets have already covered this story, with left-leaning outlets emphasizing that it's the United States sending this equipment, running headlines like U.S. announces new $725 million aid package for Ukraine. Right-leaning outlets, on the other hand, have emphasized that it's the Biden administration authorizing this transfer, running headlines like Biden shoves another $725 million out the door to Ukraine. As you can see, same story, but very different framing. And this is just one of the reasons why Ground News is such a handy tool. I especially like the Ground News blind spot feature, which shows me articles that are getting lots of traction in one political sphere and not in the other, and helps make sure that my media consumption stays pretty balanced. I use Ground News every day for my research and my day-to-day news consumption, and I think you'll like it too. In fact, I can get you a crazy deal. Between now and the end of the year, you can get 50% off the same Vantage plan that I use every day. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's or follow the link in the description below. Again, to get 50% off their Vantage plan. That's ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's to get 50% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. On February 3rd, 1991, a massive shadow crept along the coastline of Khafji, Saudi Arabia. Stretching more than 887 feet from front to back, this hulking vessel was larger than some aircraft carriers, but harkened back to a time before air power was the dominant force over the seas, a time when firepower was the ruling doctrine of the day. It was an era that many believed ended in the 1950s, when the Iowa-class battleship USS Missouri had officially been relegated to mothballs. But now, more than 3.5 decades after its retirement, the legendary Missouri was back in the fight. Seemingly all at once, its 9 massive 16-inch guns opened fire with such ferocity they seemed to be ripping thunder from the sky itself, as each 120-ton gun sent 2,700-pound projectiles ripping through the air at more than twice the speed of a 9mm pistol round. It was the first time the Missouri's main guns had roared to life since 1953. But it wouldn't be the last. Over the next few days, the Missouri rained 112 of these massive shells down onto Iraqi forces occupying Saudi Arabian territory, wiping out artillery positions and concrete command and control bunkers miles inland. In a war that's come to be known for America bringing advanced warfighting technologies like stealth jets and laser-guided bombs to bear, the unretired USS Missouri and its sister ship, the Wisconsin, proved brute force naval bombardments still had their place in the pantheon of warfighting. The following year, in March of 1992, the Missouri became the last American battleship to depart active service, but its powerful presence supporting ground forces with heavy fire lingered in the minds of American military planners as they worked to shift America's defense posture toward a new era of asymmetric conflict following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Throughout the great power competition of the Cold War, the U.S. Navy had placed its focus on what's commonly called blue water operations, fielding vessels that were adept at air defense, referred to as anti-air warfare in the Navy, and ship-to-ship combat on the open ocean. Ships like the Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyers, which first entered service the same year the Missouri returned to combat, perfectly represented this warfighting philosophy, bringing the immense capabilities of the newly fielded Aegis combat system to bear via 90 vertical launch system cells, each capable of launching between 1 and 4 anti-surface, anti-air, or anti-ship missiles. But with the military's focus shifting away from the once sprawling and formidable Soviet Navy and toward aggressive regional powers like Iran and North Korea, the Navy saw a growing need for a new class of vessel that could serve in the naval surface fire support role that had recently been occupied by reinstated Iowa-class battleships. To that end, the same year the Missouri was sent back out to pasture, the Navy kicked off the 21st Century Destroyer, or DD-21 technology study, which sought to couple that arguably dated naval fire support capability from past battleships with the latest in 21st century technologies, including, most prominently, stealth, as had been demonstrated in secret by Lockheed's experimental stealth ship known as Sea Shadow, which at the time had been sailing for more than 8 years already, despite the public not learning of its existence until another year later. As time pressed on, this new 21st century destroyer concept departed further and further from the Arleigh-Burkes that preceded it, adopting a distinctively pronounced tumble-home hull that gets narrower from the waterline up and would lend itself well to a reduced radar cross-section. But in 2001, when the contract for the first of these destroyers was to be awarded, the program was instead shuttered in favor of what was seen as a lower-cost alternative dubbed the Future Service Combatant, or FSC program. This change may have been a bit political, however, as the new FSC destroyer, now dubbed DDX but soon changed to DDG-1000, carried over several of the DD-21's design elements, though shuffled around a bit to relocate its main guns, change the layout of its missile tubes, and add helicopter facilities, none of which really lent themselves to cost savings, but the total number of vessels on order was reduced at this time from 32 to 24. This new destroyer would also carry over the DD-21's intended role as a naval fire support platform, which it would accomplish using a pair of groundbreaking new naval artillery weapons known simply as the Advanced Gun System. These 155mm weapons didn't pack anything close to the punch delivered by the 16-inch guns on the Iowa class, but could deliver its much smaller 230-pound projectiles with pinpoint accuracy to targets potentially 5 times further away, or as far out as 100 miles, according to some sources. Now, this was possible thanks to incredibly advanced rocket-propelled and GPS-guided munitions that these weapons were designed to fire, called long-range land attack projectiles. Through a combination of automated systems and precise flight path calculations, the weapon's developer, BAE Systems, claimed a single destroyer armed with advanced gun systems could put between 140 and 160 of these powerful rounds in the air at once, impacting in simultaneous bursts of 6 rounds at a time against the same or separate targets. Now, this could provide ground forces, including special operations troops operating in coastal areas, with the equivalent of an immense amount of air power and support, as each of these projectiles delivered more explosive power than a Hellfire missile. And a single gun could consistently deliver another GPS-guided round roughly every 6 seconds, and in an emergency, it could do so even faster. In 2008, the Navy announced the name of the first of these new destroyers, and in doing so, also announced the class's title, Zumwalt, in honor of the former Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Elmo Zumwalt Jr. And on February 11th of 2009, production on the future USS Zumwalt officially began. But by then, it was already apparent that these futuristic warships were going to cost much more than initially anticipated, and the number of ships on order was reduced to 7 in 2005, and then down to just 3 by the time construction began. Now, to be clear, the Navy was already in the early stages of shifting its priorities again, away from that naval fire support role and back toward blue water operations. But the rapidly rising costs of the Zumwalt-class and the technologies it brought to bear certainly didn't help this class's case. And in fact, let's talk about its classification for a minute, because despite being called a destroyer, the new USS Zumwalt was a massive ship. Stretching 610 feet from bow to stern, the new Zumwalt class was more than 100 feet longer and 40% larger than the Arleigh Burke class destroyers that came before it. In fact, the Zumwalt was 43 feet longer and more than 6,100 tons heavier than America's largest warships at the time, America's Ticonderoga class cruisers. It was nearly as long as the South Dakota class battleships the U.S. operated during World War II. But despite its immense size, the Zumwalt's radar-wicking shape and composite materials made it exceedingly difficult to detect on radar. According to Chris Johnson, a spokesman for the Naval Sea Systems Command back in 2014, the ship's radar return was comparable to that of a small fishing boat, and generally speaking, the Zumwalt is about 50 times harder to detect than an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Thanks to advanced automation, it also operates with less than half the crew of an Arleigh Burke, with just 150 or so sailors needed for combat operations. In order to power all that automation and an ever-growing list of onboard systems, the Zumwalt uses an integrated power system that draws current from 2 Rolls-Royce MT-30 gas turbines that drive electric generators. Now, these generators not only produce power for propulsion, but also for the rest of the ship's onboard systems. And with an astonishing 78 megawatts of power on tap. I'm talking about enough electrical power for nearly 10,000 residential homes. The Zumwalt can cruise almost silently at 20 knots and still have 58 megawatts of power left over in reserve. According to some reports, the electric propulsion system in the Zumwalt gives it roughly the same acoustic signature as a Los Angeles-class attack submarine, making it among the quietest warships you are likely to ever come across. The ship even uses water sleeting and passive cool air induction, not just to cool onboard systems, but to reduce its thermal signature, making stealth a truly all-encompassing design focus. But the ballooning costs of these ships, which by then had climbed all the way to $4 billion per vessel, even after $10 billion in research and development, resulted in the questionable removal of several key capabilities. With the decision made to put Arleigh Burke's back into production with the new and more broadly capable Flight 3 design, the Zumwalt's air and ballistic missile defense capabilities were practically neutered. With the advanced gun systems seen as the ship's primary weapons, the Zumwalt's total number of vertical launch system, or VLS cells, meant to carry surface-to-air and surface-to-surface missiles, was reduced from an initial 128 down to just 80. Rather than using the same Mark 41 VLS cells found on existing destroyers and cruisers, the Zumwalt carries the Mark 57 Peripheral Vertical Launch System, or PVLS, which distributes 20 modules of 4 cells each along the perimeter of the hull with thick steel inner walls and thinner steel outer shells to direct any explosions outward, thus minimizing missile losses and damage to the ship if directly hit. And these cells are actually bigger than the Mark 41s, which means they at least theoretically could have been used to launch even larger weapons with greater range. But despite that, and the fact that the ship is capable of carrying extremely effective air defense weapons like the SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 in these cells, budget cuts crippled the Zumwalt's long-range detection and targeting capabilities for airborne threats, eliminating the large S-band Spy-4 array and leaving the ship with only its smaller X-band Spy-3 that was meant to work in conjunction with that larger array. As a result, the ship can't find airborne targets at long range and has no need for long-range interceptors. So, instead, those VLS cells are mostly packed with 4 Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, or ESSMs, each. Now that gives the ship a maximum of 320 interceptors, which is a lot, but they're all limited in range to roughly 30 miles or so. But worst of all, chopping the total number of Zumwalts down to just 3 quickly resulted in the advanced gun system the ship was designed to employ becoming too expensive to fire. With just 3 ships to arm instead of more than 30, it meant producing far fewer of those advanced GPS-guided long-range land attack projectiles. Economies of scale meant large volumes of these tech-packed munitions could come at a reasonable price, but with just a handful of systems to load, the price tag exploded up to more than $800,000 per round. So by the time the USS Zumwalt entered active service in 2016, it lacked the necessary systems to serve as a capable air defense platform. It lacked the main guns it needed for the Naval Fire Support mission, and it still had a host of technical issues with its advanced propulsion, its electrical systems, its automation, and more to solve. Despite how difficult the Zumwalt may have been to detect and target, the ship itself just didn't have much to offer in the fight. With the final 2 Zumwalt-class destroyers already under construction, the total program cost at the time was a reported $22.5 billion, or roughly $30 billion in today's currency, enough to fund the construction of 2 Gerald R. Ford-class supercarriers. In a real way, the Zumwalt class became the poster child for ineffectual military spending in an era rampant with cost overruns and production delays. But now, it could find a new life as the Navy's specialized stealth hypersonic sniper. In fact, it may be better suited for that job than the Naval Fire Support job it was designed to fill. In August of 2023, the USS Zumwalt arrived at an Ingalls shipbuilding dry dock in Mississippi to have its now useless advanced gun systems ripped out of its hull and replaced with 4 large new 87-inch vertical missile tubes meant to support what will be the Navy's first in-service hypersonic missile, known as the Conventional Prompt Strike Weapon, or CPS. Each of these 4 tubes will house a multiple all-up-round canister, or MAC, that holds 3 CPS missiles, giving the Zumwalt a total loadout of 12 long-range hypersonic weapons. Now, this weapon has been under joint development with the US Army since 2018, but actually builds upon progress made by the Army's former Advanced Hypersonic Weapon, or AHW program, that saw its first flight tests all the way back in 2011. And like the AHW, this new missile is a hypersonic glide vehicle, or HGV, which means it's carried aloft via a conventional rocket booster, not unlike a ballistic missile. But upon separation from the booster, usually at a lower altitude, the HGV glides unpowered down toward its targets at immense speeds while maneuvering to complicate intercept efforts. This is why hypersonic weapons are considered so difficult to bring down. Now, most HGVs, like those in service for Russia and China, are usually depicted as having a flat wedge glider shape, but the conventional prompt strike weapon and its Army equivalent known as the long-range hypersonic weapon both use the same, seemingly conical-shaped HGV called the Common Hypersonic Glide Body. Both Army and Navy versions use the same basic missile system, which includes a 34.5-inch 2-stage solid fuel rocket booster and the hypersonic glide body that's reportedly armed with a kinetic energy projectile warhead. The Army version, known to many as Dark Eagle, will be fired from truck-based launchers, whereas the Navy's CPS weapon will serve first on the Zumwalt class of destroyers and then make their way to Virginia-class attack submarines. According to Army documentation, this weapon has a range in excess of 1,725 miles, and in truth, it may be much more than that. And the weapon's first successful flight test on June 28th of this year, it was launched from the Pacific Missile Range facility in Hawaii to a target in the Marshall Islands more than 2,000 miles away. Arming America's 3 Zumwalt-class destroyers with weapons like this could provide a significant strategic capability in the Pacific, where China's anti-access area denial strategy has prompted the fielding of several new long-range anti-ship missile systems capable of holding American aircraft carriers at risk from more than 1,000 miles out. A stealthy surface combatant armed with long-range hypersonic missiles that are all but impossible to defend against could help carve a path through China's area denial bubble by relying on its stealth to close with Chinese shores and its near-indefensible hypersonic payload to engage anti-ship weapon systems, command and control facilities, and more. In fact, the Zumwalt's combination of stealth and hypersonic missiles could ultimately prove more useful than its original battleship-like design intent, as the US has since pivoted back toward great power competition. The truth is, the US Navy would actually have little need for a ship that could bombard Chinese shores with artillery shells, but could find significant uses for a stealth ship that packs a hypersonic punch and can even deploy special operations troops near adversary coastlines with little risk of detection. In the long run, even hypersonic missiles are unlikely to change the ultimate fate of the Zumwalt class as a design that was just too forward-reaching for its time. But like the massive and powerful Seawolf submarines that also saw their production numbers shaved from nearly 30 down to just 3, the right platform in the right place at the right time, armed with the right weapons, can absolutely have an outsized effect on the outcome of a single battle, and maybe even an entire war. And while the $30 billion spent on these exotic destroyers might not have been the best bang for the Navy's buck, just how much bang they ultimately do deliver just might surprise us all. And with that ends this edition of Sea Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.